Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into something today that's been weighing on a lot of minds, I think, and to be honest, it's got us a little concerned too.
Oh,
Election integrity. With 2024 right around the corner, specifically, we've gotten a lot of questions about, well, election deniers and what kind of impact they could have. So we've got some research to dig into today. Some pretty insightful stuff, actually.
yeah, absolutely.
Huh.
The report we're looking at here from the Center for Media and Democracy, they really get into the weeds on this. And I got to say, some of what they found is, well, it's pretty alarming.
For sure. I mean, right off the bat, the numbers themselves are kind of shocking. They found 239 individuals. And we're not just talking about, some folks sounding off on Twitter. These are people in positions of actual power
Right.
who have disputed the 2020 election results.
And it's important, I think, to be really clear on what we mean, even when we say election denier, right?
Mm.
Because it's not just, somebody who maybe disagrees with the outcome of an election. This is about, actively working to actually undermine the process itself.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about people who refuse to accept the results, after they've been certified, who support these legal challenges that are frankly unfounded and, even endorse these tactics that could actually end up disenfranchising voters.
And this report, it goes beyond just, saying, here's a list of names. They looked at where these individuals stand today. And
Oh,
get this, 102 of them are currently working as election administrators
I know.
in swing states.
Wow.
These are the people who are going to be, directly in charge of running the elections in 2024 in those very states.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's so concerning, right? I mean, think about it this way. It's like someone, overseeing a bank, but they fundamentally just don't believe that money exists. And what does that even mean for the system?
Right.
It just throws the whole thing into question. And that's kind of the gravity of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's not just, contained to the administrative level either, right? This report found individuals at all different levels of government, congressional candidates, people running for statewide office. I mean, the whole gamut.
Yeah. It's a pattern. It speaks to something, much broader than just a few people here or there, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this is about a movement that is actively trying to erode the public's trust well, honestly, in the very foundation of how our democracy works. It's like we're seeing this thread, connecting this distrust we're talking about back to the actual tactics that were used in 2020. And the thing is, it's like it could be even more of a problem this time around.
Totally. It's like we're watching like a bad sequel, Like remember all that stuff with the absentee ballots back in 2020 and the whole thing about voting machines? I
Right.
mean, it felt like every other day there was some new conspiracy theory popping up.
Right. And this report, it actually highlights how those tactics, which,
Yeah.
let's be honest, a lot of it was based on, like straight up misinformation.
Yeah.
But even so, it had a real impact. Think about the wave of lawsuits that happened right after the election.
Oh, right.
I mean, a lot of those, they lacked any real merit, but I mean, they still created these huge delays, and it just created so much confusion at such a critical time.
Exactly. It wasn't even about like actually changing the outcome at that point.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
about making the public doubt the whole process.
Exactly.
And it feels like we're already seeing those same legal tactics being used again.
Exactly. And the thing is, now some of these players, they're in an even better position to have a real influence.
Right. And speaking of which, the report actually points to Georgia specifically as kind of a case study here. Can you maybe break that down for us a little?
Sure. So Georgia, I mean, that state has really become like a focal point for all of this concern about election integrity. And a lot of that has to do with who's actually on their state election board.
Okay.
Because, I mean, you've got a majority of the board now. Who are these people who have publicly said that they dispute the results of the 2020 election?
And that board, that's not just like a figurehead position or something.
No, no, not at all.
Yeah.
This board, I mean, they get to decide on the election rules. They oversee recounts. They even have the power to certify the election results.
Wow.
Yeah, and they've already made some decisions that are, well, let's just say they've raised some eyebrows.
Like that whole thing with requiring a hand recount of every single ballot.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, talk about a logistical nightmare, right?
Right. It's a massive undertaking. And look, I mean, on paper, I get it. Hand recounts, they're supposed to be about getting it right, ensuring accuracy. But in reality, they're so time-consuming. And, I mean, let's be honest, you're relying on humans. There's always going to be human error, and if it's not done right, you could actually end up causing more problems than you solve.
For sure. And this is all happening in a state that was already like a total pressure cooker back in 2020. I mean, you had Trump making that phone call to Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, asking him to find enough votes to change the outcome.
Oh, yeah, that phone call.
Exactly. Wild.
It is pretty crazy when you think about it, and it gets even more kind of, I don't know, ironic. Because one of these election deniers who's on Georgia's election board now, Janice Johnston, she actually supported an investigation into Raffensperger himself.
Seriously.
Yeah, claimed that he was the one who mishandled the election back in 2020.
So you've got someone who's supposed to be overseeing elections who basically questioned whether the last election was even legit and then went after the officials who, upheld the results.
Pretty much.
Man, talk about a fox guarding the henhouse.
Yeah, it definitely raises some red flags, right? Like, what are their motives here?
Yeah.
Are there conflicts of interest? I mean, it really drives home with this point we keep coming back to, about how these people, if they're in a position of power, they could really try to use that to sway things in the future.
Exactly.
And the thing is, it's not just happening in Georgia.
Right. So where do we go from here? Like, are there any other tactics that we should be keeping an eye out for as we get closer to 2024?
Well, one thing that I'm particularly worried about is this idea of election officials trying to slow things down or even block the certification of election results. And, it's not just something that could happen. It's already happening.
Oh, how so?
Well, back in August, the Georgia State Election Board, they approved this new rule that basically lets local officials delay certifying an election based on, I'll get this, reasonable inquiries.
Okay, hold on. Reasonable inquiries. I mean, what does that even mean?
Right.
That seems pretty vague, right?
It's incredibly vague, and that's what's so concerning about it. Because if there's no clear criteria, what's to stop someone from delaying things for political reasons, especially if it's a really close race, and those delays could really have an impact on the outcome. Yeah.
Right, right. So we're talking about election administrators who, haven't exactly inspired confidence in the past. We're talking about all these new rules that seem like they're, I don't know, maybe designed to make things more complicated. And then on top of that, you've got the possibility of all these delays and legal challenges. I mean, is there any good news here?
Well, there's one thing. I mean, it's not exactly, cause for celebration, but it is a positive development. I think it's less likely that we'll see that whole thing with the fake electors again like we did in 2020.
You're talking about, like, those groups of Trump supporters who basically tried to submit their own, like, rogue electors to Congress, even though Biden won their states?
Exactly.
Oh, right, right.
And, that didn't work. And a lot of those people have faced, legal consequences because of it. So, I mean, at least on a large scale, I think it's less likely to happen again. But the thing is, it still plays into this bigger problem, this climate of distrust. Because even when these things fail, they still chip away at people's faith in the system.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling the weight of all this. I mean, it's like we're talking about these, I don't know, worst case scenarios. But then again, it's like this could actually happen.
Right. It's like you don't want to get everyone all freaked out. But at the same time, we have to be real about this, And these are definitely scenarios that are, they're pretty alarming, but they're not unrealistic either.
Not at all. So, okay, let's zoom out for a second. Like, if someone's listening to all of this and they're understandably concerned, what does this mean for them? For the average person heading to the polls in 2024?
Right. What should they actually be prepared for? I think that's the question, isn't it? And I think when we talk about the possibility of all these disruptions, the delays, the legal challenges, it all adds up to this. I think we need to be ready for things to be really confusing, potentially. Like, what if the election drags on? We don't know the results for weeks, maybe even months.
Oh, man. And that's not just like an inconvenience, right? I mean, that does some real damage to our democracy.
Exactly. Because that's when things get really messy. It just creates this breeding ground for misinformation, and it just feeds into the very thing that these folks are trying to do, which is make people lose faith.
It's like a vicious cycle.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that's why, more than ever, people need to be aware of these tactics.
Yeah.
Be ready to really think critically about any information they're seeing, especially in those, like right after the election.
Okay, so let's talk about solutions then, because I'm sure some folks listening are thinking, okay, so what can I even do about this?
Right. Well, first things first, pay attention, know who your local election officials even are, what they stand for, how they voted on these issues.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
It really is in this case. And then beyond that, think about supporting organizations that are fighting for election integrity, that are working on voter protection. I mean, there are some amazing groups out there doing the work, on the ground to fight misinformation, make sure people can vote, and advocate for secure elections. So, yeah, support them however you can.
And, I mean, it might seem obvious, but vote.
Yes. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah.
I know it might sound kind of cliche, but honestly, it's more important now than ever. Don't let any of this, the cynicism or the frustration keep you from getting out there and participating. Make your voice heard.
This whole conversation, I think it's been really, really eye-opening. It's
Yeah.
a lot to take in, but we appreciate you coming on and sort of walking us through all of this because it's definitely something we all need to be aware of as we head into this election. For everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and please check out the show notes for some resources you can look into. Stay engaged, stay informed, and most importantly, stay vigilant.
Well said. I
Yeah.
totally agree.